All right, so if everyone is okay, we'll get started here. This is a very fun kind of hybrid format. We're going to do our best today to try it out. But we are very lucky to have an early history of Duluth's Incline Railway for today's forum. And I actually don't have the bio in front of me here. But Doug, if you wanted to kind of introduce yourself and then take it from here, we're going to have a fun experience.
Yeah, of course, my name is Doug Stevens, and I've been involved in Duluth history for about 20 years now. And I have been on the boards of the Skyline Planning Preservation Alliance and the Duluth Preservation Alliance. And so I've done quite a few programs, and I am very interested in helping getting the incline steps, which is probably the only thing left of the incline today, a hiking trail. So it's kind of gotten pretty dear to me. So I would just like to start and get us going. Woo-woo. So what was the purpose of the incline? Why was it built? And who are the people behind the incline? So these are the questions I'll be answering, and I will even give you some more information. So the picture you're looking at right now is showing the incline on Superior Street, and that is the ticket place right on Superior Street. And of course, the incline went straight up 7th Avenue West. And then if you want to hold the next slide up. So here we have the two men that were basically behind the incline. The man to the right is William Rogers, and the man to the left, I think I might be backwards here because I'm looking at it here, is of course Rutherford B. Hayes. So Rutherford B. Hayes was the 19th president of the United States from 1877 to 1881. And Rogers was a man who came to Duluth because he thought Duluth was going to become the next boom town. And so he convinced Hayes to come and invest in Duluth. Wow. So the two of them bought 1,000 acres of land from the bay up past Skyline Parkway. And their reason for doing this was they wanted people to buy their land and build homes up in the Duluth Heights area. So the main reason for building the incline was not a tourist attraction. It was a way to get people up to Duluth Heights. Because you have to remember, in this time period, there were no cars, no buses. You were on foot or horseback. Next one? No, wait a minute. One more thing I want to say too. So Rogers and Hayes started the Highland Improvement Company, which they decided would be the title for this development they were going to do. And they also worked with, what's his name? I can't remember now, but I'll get to that later too. If you want to go to the next slide. Okay, this shows, I maybe pick it up here too. But this is the map of how the incline went. So this is Superior Street here, and it went directly up 7th Avenue up to Hilltop Park. So this would have been behind the old weather station. This is up on Skyline Parkway. If you've ever been up there, it's around 631 West Skyline Parkway. So the incline climbed 509 feet. It was more than half a mile long at a 15 to 25% grade. So the two tracks were built into a 2,975-foot superstructure. And if you want to go to the next slide. So we're going to be talking about the three phases of the incline. During its time period, it had three different phases it went through. And the first one was the garage-sized cars, which I'll talk about. The second one was after a tragedy happened, which I'll talk about. They had to redo it again. And then after they did it the second time, they realized it really wasn't very sufficient, so they did it again. So if you want to move to the next slide. So this is the very first look at the cars that they had designed for the first phase of the rail system. So these cars were garage-sized cars. Each car weighed 29 tons. And each car was 41 feet in length and 15 feet wide. They could carry 4 teams of horses or 250 people standing. So it was powered by a hoisting engine driven by several 400 horsepower boilers in a powerhouse at the top of the railway. So they would pass precisely in the middle because they had to be balanced. So that was the purpose of having 2 cars, one on each side, and then they would pass in the middle. So it opens December 2nd, 1891. So William Rogers, the man who was really involved in this with Hayes, actually left shortly after the incline was up and running. Then Luther Mendenhall, who was also an investor, took over where Rogers had taken over. And Rogers had also been the park board president, and he was the first park board commissioner in Duluth. So Luther Mendenhall took that job over too. So if you want to go to the next slide. Now we have the Beacon Hill Pavilion that got built. They finally realized that, oh my God, this could be a tourist attraction. So they thought maybe the Duluth Street Rail Company thought they should hire someone to build a pavilion at the top. So they hired Francis Fitzpatrick and Oliver Traphagen. They were 2 of Duluth's premier architects at the time. So the cost to build this was $20,000. That would be $600,000 today. Wow. And so it had 20 windows looking out to the lake. It had a tower on the top. It had an amusement center. It had a theater, and they could seat 2,000 people in the theater. So that gives you some kind of idea of how many people could fit into this building, which I thought was very, very impressive. And they also had restaurants there too. And it opened just in time for a 4th of July celebration. So they had $500 of fireworks blown off at that time. And I don't know if you can see, because it's pretty dark, but there are a lot of people here. So that day alone, 14,716 people rode the incline that day.
Doug, tell me again exactly where this is in the hillside. Is that where that park is now, that Pine Hill Park?
It's called Hilltop Park now, and it was called Beacon Hill at that time. And it's directly behind the weather station. So you have to go above Skyline Parkway and go up to about 9th Street. And right now, the Duluth Traverse has actually built a biking trail that goes over either where the powerhouse was or the pavilion was. There's a big slab of concrete there. So it's something to go check out if you have time. And it's really quite interesting, I think. And the other thing I wanted to say is during this time after they built the pavilion, it still wasn't a park around here. So they wanted to get it named as a park. But what happened was the financial panic happened, 1893. So then there's no money. So it took till 1907 to get a park designated for this area. And it was only a 1-block park then. And the other thing,
How long?
too, before we go, is Professor Baldwin, who was a resident in Duluth. He actually had hot air balloons go from here, which made it kind of interesting too. So you could ride a hot air balloon.
Wow. We hear somebody here on the computer. What was the question?
How long after the after the ride was built, did they build the pavilion? Was it like just a matter of months? I wasn't clear on that.
Oh, it took a year before they did that.
Because you said that the thing opened on December and then in July. So it was a year and a half then, or?
It might have been, because when you look at December 1891 and then opening in July of 1892, yes.
So they had a lot of people riding it before they had any attraction at the top?
Well, that we really don't know. There wasn't a lot of reference to that at the time. But I think they realized that after it was built to get people up to Duluth Heights, that people were starting to enjoy the views from there. And you could take this ride from the bottom of the Superior Street and go all the way to the top. And where else could you do that in Duluth at that time? Because of this incline, there was no way that they could build roads at that time into the hillside like it was. I mean,
Did the thing run 24 hours, 7 days a week?
I don't know about that for sure. I'm assuming it did, but there was no reference to that I know, but I can't imagine it didn't. I would totally believe it ran all the time.
Wow.
If you want to go to the next slide. So on May 28th, 1901, a fire broke out in the powerhouse. And it also went to the pavilion. So only after 9 years after the pavilion was built, it was already destroyed by fire. And there was the east car that was at the top. And then there was the west car that was at the bottom.
Yes, trying to get it.
Oh, yeah. It can be really touchy.
There we go.
Yeah, sometimes if you tap that too hard, it'll go get out of that.
Almost.
Oh, we're all patient.
All right.
Yeah,
I think it's got that. There we go. There we go.
Okay, I'm just gonna point out a few things here. So here is where the fire happened. This is the powerhouse, and as you can see, here's one of the car that was at the top at the time. And this is where it crashed. Believe it or not, the fire got so hot, the table melted. The car went sailing down the rail system, crashed the ticket area and ended up in the railroad yard. But luckily, no one got injured. No one died. It was amazing. They were able to clear everyone. They knew they could see the fire. They knew something was going to happen. They made sure everyone was out of there. So that was great. Let's switch to the next. So now we're coming to the second rebuild because, of course, the first one was destroyed by fire. So it took another year to bring it back. The Duluth Street Rail Company decided this time that was going to be electric powered. They were only going to do one car. The one car would be on the west side, and the east side would have a counterbalanced weight. And so they also built stations. They built one at 4th, 5th, and 7th Avenue West, so you could get on in different places and off. And so it opened on January 1st, 1902. It ran every half an hour, and it proved to be too infrequent. And passengers ended up having to stand because it was so popular. So in 1911, after 9 years again, they decide to rebuild. So now we have the second rebuild, and now it's the St. Paul Transit Company that built the next cars. They were much larger. They were 24 feet long, and they were 11 feet wide. And they were powered by an electric overhead motor. And it had lighting, heating, and an air compressor for the brakes. And then they decided to rebuild the stations again. So they had stations where people could get on at 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, then in between 5th and 6th, and then in between 6th and 7th Street. So they ran from 1911 to 1939. It ran every 15 minutes. It traveled 6 miles an hour, and the one-way trip would take 8 minutes. And each car had its own conductor, and his duties were to open and close the doors, collect the tickets, issue and recover the transfers, and notify the engineer at the top all is clear, and then they could go. So I want to go to the next slide. This is an interior shot, which is kind of dark, but it showed the interior of the cars that were built by the St. Paul Transit Company. And I go to the next one. And now to prove that this was actually built to go up to Duluth Heights, here we have one of the streetcars. There were actually 2 of them here, and this was the powerhouse and waiting station. So when the Incline made it to the top for people who lived up in Duluth Heights, they could grab the streetcar and go to their destination. And so this ran every 30 minutes again. And then if there was a rush hour, they would drag the second car out, and then they would meet every 15 minutes. So that would make it more doable for people who lived up there. So we'll go to the next slide. So now it closes in 1939, September, Labor Day, 1939. It's done. And here they're saying this is the last chance you have to ride the Incline. So what was the cause of the Incline going?
The decline of the incline.
Well,
Yeah,
streetcars.
decline of the Incline. Well put. You gotta go to the next slide. So when you look at the causes of it, probably is there was no mechanized equipment to build roads where it was not possible before. And cars and buses became the choice of transportation. And then the Incline itself was expensive to maintain as a ridership decreased. So it closed only after 48 years. I'll go to the next slide.
1948.
What happened in 40? What happened in 48?
39.
It was 48 years in service.
Yes, 48 years.
Oh, okay, thanks.
So what is left of the Incline are the steps. The steps are 130 years old today. And if you look at the steps here to the right, this is by the Bethel on First Street and Masabi Avenue where that comes in. They're in beautiful shape for 130 years old. I mean, there is not a crack or anything in these steps. And then if you look at the one to the right here, this is at the top of Skyline Parkway. And they're in relatively good shape too, and so are the sidewalks and stuff. So if you want to go to the next slide. So when I was doing research, I found out that Chuck Frederick had done an article about the Incline steps back in September 30th of 2006. And he described Brian Bush and his father, who just had moved into the neighborhood. And they were just walking around Skyline Parkway area, and they happened to stumble on these steps, and they knew nothing about them. So they started down the steps, and they kind of wondered what was here. You know, there's got to be something that was here. So after their second walk, they went straight down the steps, right to the library and did the research and thought, oh my God, there was an incline here. So they were trying to figure out, can this become on the National Register of Historic Structures? Can it be saved somehow? And everyone kept commenting through Mary Ann Norton, who we had lost. She was a great historian here in Duluth. And she was a member of the Duluth Preservation Alliance like I was. And she was so enthusiastic to get this done. She thought it would be a perfect match and it should happen. But of course, nothing happened. So I'm going to move to the next slide. So could the steps become a recreational hiking trail? Well, I looked up on the park master plan. So this was in 2011, which is already, like 10 years ago. Yeah. So, but they said you could create and connect system to trails and trailheads, create continuous bike connections across the city up and down, connect to the ridge line, connect neighborhoods to trails and trails to destinations, including and currently served areas. And a better trail and bike connections are needed to and from schools and in and out of town. And the actions needed, add trails in underserved areas and add trailheads at key locations. So this was in the park master plan. Next slide. Then they particularly pointed out the former 7th Avenue Incline. The former 7th Avenue Incline rail route and historic walkway trail can be utilized as a pedestrian route from downtown to Skyline Parkway. The trail is in currently very good shape and would require minimal repair. So at least the Parks Department was looking at probably establishing it as a trail at some point, but nothing has happened yet. We'll move to the next slide. So then just this past year, this summer, the Arrowhead Regional Development Commission was doing a study, the Metropolitan Pedestrian Plan, and it included Duluth and Superior. And I made sure I got on that. So I thought, I got to make sure they get the incline steps on this. So after a year of study, it was recommended. Page 3, number 8, recommending the incline steps along 7th Avenue West from 1st Street up to 8th Street, Skyline Parkway, become part of the step system. So yes. So here is the map again, and this shows the path of the incline today. The Parks Department actually made this map for me. So this is at the bottom, this is the bottom of Superior Street here, and this is going up to Skyline. So here is Superior Street and going up to the 2nd, and this is the 3rd Street here. The little red part was a controversial area. I don't know if you can see Isabel, it's so light, but this is yellow and this is a red. That meant it was controversial because there's a buildings that have been allowed to be built there. The 10 Cali apartments and villas are in here. And then Dave Samala got the okay to build 4 houses in between 3rd and 4th Street went on 7th Avenue. And the city did not know if they still had right of way there. And they said, oh, you're going to have to hire a landscape architect. You're going to have to hire an attorney. It's going to cost a lot of money. And I thought, there's got to be a simpler way. So I went down to the public library. I asked for a map, and they have these plot maps that were done in the 20s and 30s. And we looked up, found the partial codes, said, go up to engineering, and they can tell you whether there's an easement for these properties. So I went up to the engineer's department, gave them the parcel codes. They looked it up, and sure enough, both people had signed easements that there's 4 feet of right of way on both sides of the steps. So that meant you can still go through their properties. And then I met with Ken Talley, the owner of the Talley Apartments and Villas, gave him this little PowerPoint presentation, and he said, I'd be happy to let people go through my property. And then I got a hold of Judith Johnson, who owns this house here, and she said, oh, people go by here all the time. I'd have no problem with it. In fact, my husband is the one who built the steps to the west of our house, because in order for us to have our house built, we had to agree to move the steps to the west. Next slide. So here we have the Samla house. And here are the incline steps moved to the west. They would have been on the opposite side of this house. These chunks of concrete are from the incline. They found these chunks and then they built steps out of stone and used these chunks of concrete to go along the steps to kind of create a path. So I thought it was very great initiative. They did a great job. It's a little challenging to go down that, but it's very doable. And I was very happy that they did that. And I want to go to the next slide.
Did you take that photo then?
Yes.
That's beautiful.
And this is where the incline would have been. This is to the east of where the Samuel houses were. And right here, you can see these big concrete pillars that were built into the stone wall. That would have been what held up the rail system. So then the steps would have been right here.
Hey, Doug,
Yes.
have you ever talked to Warren High? I think Sally and I were up there not too long ago, and he owns some property right there too. Does he know anything about the incline?
I have not. I didn't know that he, but he should know. He's 100, right? Yeah. Probably would know. He probably even wrote it. I never even thought to ask him. Yeah, but great idea. Yeah, great suggestion. Maybe I'll go to the next slide. Now this is where the Kent Alley apartments and villas are. And these are not the original steps. These are steps that they built to get up to their apartments, because they really reconfigured this whole area between First Street and Second Street. But they still are usable, and this would be the path we would have to use or take. And go to the next slide. And here's another section of steps again in the Talley apartments and villas that went up the street. And you can still go through there. It's a little bit of a challenge to find it, but I know my way there because I've led like 3 or 4 hikes on the incline steps for the DPA and for the Planning Preservation Alliance. So I know how it goes. Let me go to the next slide. So what would it take to make this happen? Oh, well, like I was talking about, the right-of-way on 7th Avenue corridor was one of the biggest things that the Parks Department didn't know. They didn't want to do the research. They didn't want to spend any money on it. So we got that solved. To find an organization to adopt the steps, well, I did find the Echo Rotary Club that was very interested in adopting the steps. And then the city threw in to me, well, if they're willing to adopt the steps, they're going to have to pay 1.5 million. Well, they're going to have $1.5 million of liability insurance. And I thought, that's a bunch of bunk. The Parks Department has all this land, they have all these parks, and you can't tell me that they don't have insurance on them. So they're throwing another roadblock to me. So when I do the presentation to the Eco Rotary Club, they were so anxious. They really wanted to do it, but they said, we don't have that kind of money, because it'll be $800 a month for that insurance a year. So then I went to the Duluth Preservation Alliance, and they were willing maybe to do 1 year, but they said, we don't want this to be ongoing. We don't want to pay $800 every year for this. So that kind of put a bonker on that. And so now I after COVID, because COVID really threw a wrench into this whole thing. I mean, I just had to quit, stop, boom. So now I'm trying to get back into it. So it's getting the Parks Department to agree. Going to the Duluth City Council would be really huge, I think, and the Duluth Planning Department Board. because I'd like to do these last three, because we never did that. And I think if that didn't work, I'd go straight to the mayor, because I think if you go to the mayor, she probably might be able to do more too. But Deb Filipovich, who is Zach Filipovich's mom, she and I have been working together on this project, and she really wants to help me again. So I think we're going to be looking at this very soon. I'm going to go to the next slide. So one of the things we talked about was, you know, we really like to see a sign or several signs up on the steps, kind of telling people what was there, kind of giving credit to William King Rogers, who really started the Incline. And I didn't mention this before, but he also was the man behind Skyline Parkway. When William King Rogers came here, he took Olaf Benson up to Bull Inger Tower and showed him his plan to create a road up here, Skyline Parkway, which he didn't call it that, of course, at that time. And Olaf Benson said, well, Duluth should take and do whatever they could to make this happen, because Mother Nature kind of left it in good shape. I mean, it was after the glaciers receded, there was like almost perfect roadbed. You wouldn't have to do much. So William King Rogers was really behind that. And that's the reason why I'd like to have another sign at the top of Skyline Parkway and the Incline, because it would recognize Rogers for the time he spent, and Luther Mendenhall, because he was another man who, after Rogers left, he was the next park board commissioner, and he really invested in Duluth too. So it'd be helpful to recognize some of the people that did this, and I think it would be important. And go to the next slide. Now, I was just hiking on the Duluth-Winnipeg Pacific Trail out west, and the park system has put up some brand new signs. And these are wayfinding signs. And we didn't talk about that before when I was doing my presentations, because these signs weren't up. But these are beautiful signs, and these would be perfect for getting through the Tally apartments and for getting around where the Samala House is. So this would be another option of wayfinding, of getting people past those properties where it's kind of difficult to get to. We'll go to the next slide. Well, what would the signs cost? Well, I knew about this because I had a sign built for the Snively Monument, and that's what it costs to do one sign. And it was a lot of money, but at the time, the Skyline Planning Preservation Alliance, which I was a part of, had the money to do it, and we did a fundraiser that year, and we got enough money to do that one sign. But we figured it'd be nice to have 6 of them, so then you're looking at $10,200 just for these signs, and that wouldn't include the 2 or 3 wayfinding signs you would need. But just kind of getting an idea. Then move to the next slide. So how to pay for expenses. So I've already been to the Duluth Preservation Alliance, and I know they would help again. Grants and fundraising would be another way. I'm not a grant writer, but if someone knew of someone or how we could make this happen, that would be great. And groups or organizations, like when I went to the Eco Rotary Club, they were so interested. There might be other groups out there that might be interested and could help with financing some signs too. And just asking for donations. And then I was just looking for other suggestions that you in the audience might have. Okay, and we'll go to the next one. And this is just all my acknowledgements, because I couldn't do this without the Catherine Martin Library, the University of Minnesota, and their special archives and collections. Nancy Nelson and Tony Durkins wrote a book called Duluth Historic Parks, the first 160 years. And that was a resource too. And then Aaron Isaacs has a book called Twin Ports by Trolley. And I used his information too. And I asked all these people for okay to use their information. And they said, yes, just give us recognition. And so the Minnesota Digital Library too is where you can go online and find photos. And then I just did the other pictures from the area. But that's the end of my presentation, and that's a thank you for being here. Thank you for listening to this. I really appreciate it.